There's a room underneath Arrowhead Stadium that most people don't even know exists. No windows, no distractions, just a massive screen, a remote control, and Patrick Mahomes sitting in the dark, rewinding the same 3-second play over and over again. And the guy sitting next to him, a rookie who had never thrown a pass in an NFL regular season game. A kid who, just a few months earlier, was worried about whether he'd even make the roster. Now he's sitting next to the greatest quarterback of his generation, watching film at 11 o'clock at night, learning things that coaches don't even teach in practice. And here's what nobody is talking about. Those sessions didn't just develop a few wide receivers. Those sessions quietly, almost invisibly, shifted the entire balance of power in the AFC West. The Denver Broncos had their new quarterback. The Las Vegas Raiders had completely overhauled their offense. The Los Angeles Chargers had one of the most talented young rosters in the league. Everyone was watching the AFC West and saying, this is the year Kansas City finally slips. They were wrong. And the reason they were wrong was happening in a dark film room in the middle of the night, weeks before the season even started. This is that story. Let's go back to the offseason, and I need you to really picture this moment because it matters. The Kansas City Chiefs had just won another Super Bowl. Confetti was still settling. Patrick Mahomes was on the field, holding that trophy, grinning that grin. And while the rest of the football world was celebrating or sulking or rebuilding, something quiet was happening inside the Chiefs organization. They were losing receivers. Not just any receivers, key pieces, guys that Mahomes had spent years building chemistry with. The kind of chemistry that doesn't come from a playbook, the kind that comes from thousands of reps, hundreds of hours of film study, and a deep, almost unspoken understanding of how each other moves. That chemistry was walking out the door. And the receivers who were coming in, they were rookies. Raw, talented, hungry, but rookies. Kids who had played in college offenses that looked nothing like what Andy Reid runs. Kids who had never seen a defense like the ones waiting for them in the AFC West. Kids who didn't yet know what Mahomes knows, that in his offense, the play on the field is almost never the actual play. The real play happens in the split second when everyone else thinks the play is dead. That's the hardest thing to teach, and Mahomes decided he wasn't going to wait for training camp to start teaching it. Here's something most people don't understand about Patrick Mahomes as a football player. Yes, he can throw a ball 70 yards off his back foot. Yes, his arm is a weapon that defies physics. Yes, he makes plays that make defensive coordinators question their career choices. But the thing that actually makes him the best, the thing that separates him from everyone else, is his mind. Mahomes processes the game at a speed that is almost unfair. He walks to the line of scrimmage, and before the ball is even snapped, he has already run through multiple scenarios in his head. He knows where every defender is. He knows what coverage they're in. He knows his first read, his second read, his third read, his escape route, and what he's going to do if all of those disappear. But here's the catch. That processing only works if his receivers are running the same mental program. If Mahomes reads a certain coverage and decides to throw to the back shoulder of his number 2 receiver on a route adjustment, that receiver has to already know to adjust, without a signal, without a call, just from reading the same defensive cues that Mahomes is reading. That is something you don't learn in a team practice. That is something you don't get from a playbook. That is something you learn by sitting in a dark room with Patrick Mahomes watching film while he points at the screen and says, right there, see that? That's when I know. That's when you need to know too. The first session happened before most of the off-season program had even officially started. One of the rookie receivers, a kid who had been drafted in the middle rounds, not a first-round pick, not a guy the national media was breathlessly hyping, got a text from Mahomes. Come in tomorrow. We're going to watch some film. Now think about what that moment feels like if you're that rookie. You're 22 years old, you've been in the league for about 15 minutes, you're still figuring out where the cafeteria is, and the greatest quarterback alive just texted you like your old friends and asked you to come study film with him. That rookie showed up an hour early, and what happened in that first session set the tone for everything that followed. Mahomes didn't start with highlights. He didn't start with the flashy plays or the long touchdowns. He started with the failures. He pulled up plays where the connection broke down, where a receiver ran the wrong route adjustment and the ball sailed incomplete, where the timing was off by half a step and a coverage sack turned into a sack instead of a big gain. He showed the rookie what breaking down looks like, and then he explained exactly why it broke down. Because here's what Mahomes understands. If you only study success, you learn what success looks like. But if you study failure first, you learn what to avoid. And avoiding the mistakes is how you create space for the success. That rookie sat there for almost 3 hours, just watching, asking questions, listening. When he walked out of that film room, he was already a different player. Word spread through the receiver room the way word spreads in any tight locker room, quietly, through whispers and glances. "Hey, you talked to Pat yet?" "Yeah? You?" "Yeah. How was it?" "Man, I don't even know how to explain it." Within a few weeks, multiple rookie receivers had been through those sessions, not all at once. Mahomes did it one by one, or sometimes in pairs, deliberately keeping the group small so the conversation could stay personal, so it wasn't a lecture, so it was a dialogue. And the things he was teaching them, they weren't in any playbook. He was teaching them his language. Think about that for a second. Every elite quarterback has a language, a system of reads and reactions and adjustments that lives in his head and gets communicated through body language, through motion, through the way he shifts his eyes or sets his feet. Mahomes' language is more complex than most because his offense is more complex than most, because Andy Reid's system is already one of the most intricate in football, and then Mahomes adds a second layer on top of it. All the improvisation, all the extension plays, all the moments where everything goes wrong and he somehow makes it right. To function in that language, you have to be fluent, and fluency takes time. Fluency takes immersion. Those film sessions were immersion school. Now, let me give you the context for why this mattered so much in the AFC West specifically, because the conference race was genuinely open wide in a way it hadn't been in years. The Broncos were buzzing. They had invested serious resources into building around their quarterback, and their defense was still one of the most physical and aggressive in the league. Mile High was gonna be loud. It was always loud. And that crowd noise, that wall of sound, is one of the underrated factors in AFC West games. It disrupts communication. It kills the ability to make pre-snap adjustments. It turns a finely tuned offense into a guessing game. Unless your receivers already know what you're thinking before you have to tell them. That's the advantage that those film sessions were building. Silent communication, the kind that doesn't need words because the understanding is already there. The Raiders had reset their culture and were playing with an edge that made them dangerous, especially at home in their gleaming stadium in Las Vegas, where the atmosphere had developed a genuine intensity. They were a team that could absolutely show up on any given Sunday and knock off anybody. And the Chargers were the team that kept every Kansas City fan awake at night. Young, talented, well-coached, with skill position players who could match up with Kansas City's weapons almost one for one. If anyone in the AFC West was going to dethrone the Chiefs, most analysts were pointing to the Chargers. The Chiefs knew all of this, Mahomes knew all of this, and he understood that the margin for error was thin, that a poorly timed incompletion, a miscommunication on a crucial third down, a receiver running the wrong adjustment at the wrong moment, any of those things could be the difference between winning and losing a game that decided the division. He was building insurance against those moments, one film session at a time.
Let's talk about what those sessions actually looked like, because I want you to picture it. The room is cold, always cold. Film rooms are always cold, something about keeping people alert, keeping minds sharp. The screen is enormous, the kind of screen where you can see every single thing happening on the field simultaneously. Mahomes would pull up a specific defensive coverage, let's say cover 2, standard, something every receiver thinks they understand. And he'd ask the rookie, "Okay, what do you do here?" And the rookie would answer, and the answer would be technically correct. It would be exactly what the playbook says, exactly what every college coach ever taught him. And Mahomes would nod. Then he'd say, "Okay, now watch what I'm watching." And he'd point to the screen, not to where the ball was going, to the safety, to the way the safety's hips were aligned, to the angle of the corner's body, to the depth of the linebacker's drop. And he'd explain, in cover 2, when that safety does this and that corner does that, the field opens up here, right here, this window. But it's only there for about a second and a half, and the way I'm going to communicate it to you is this. And then he'd show a hand gesture, or a weight shift, or the way he turned his head before the snap. That's your signal. When you see that, you already know where I'm throwing it. You don't wait for the ball to come out, you're already moving. That is the difference between a good receiver and a great receiver. And it's almost impossible to teach in a team practice setting, with 60 guys on the field and coaches blowing whistles and the defensive coordinator trying to hide his scheme. In a quiet film room at 11 at night, it's possible. And Mahomes was doing it. The first preseason game arrived. Now, preseason games are the football world's version of a dress rehearsal where neither side shows their real costume. Coaches hide their schemes, quarterbacks don't push the ball downfield. Starters play a quarter, maybe 2, and then they're gone. But the people who knew what to look for, the scouts, the coaches from opposing teams, the real students of the game, they were watching closely, because sometimes, even in the noise and chaos of a preseason game that officially means nothing, you can see something real. And what they saw from Mahomes and the rookie receivers was unusual. The timing was too good, for guys who had only been together a few months, for rookies who were supposed to be raw and uncertain and still finding their footing. The timing was too clean, the route running was too precise, the post-snap adjustments were too coordinated. One play in particular stood out. Mahomes took the snap, the pocket started to collapse immediately, and he stepped up. The rookie receiver, the one who'd been in those late-night film sessions, was running a crossing route, but as Mahomes stepped up, the receiver made a subtle adjustment, sliding his route up the seam instead of continuing across the field. It wasn't called, it wasn't signaled, it just happened, and the ball was already leaving Mahomes' hand. Complete. First down. The announcers noted the connection, said it looked sharp, said Mahomes clearly had good chemistry with the young receiver. They had no idea. By the time training camp was in full swing, something had shifted in the Chiefs' facility. The veteran receivers, the ones who had been around for a year or two, noticed it. The rookies who had been through those film sessions carried themselves differently. They walked into meetings with more confidence. They asked sharper questions. During practice, when the offense was running routes against the defense, these guys were consistently a step ahead of where everyone expected them to be. And the veterans, to their credit, didn't resent it. They leaned into it, because the rising tide thing, it's real. When one guy gets better, and then the guy next to him figures out how to get better, suddenly the whole room is competing harder. Suddenly the whole room is watching more film, asking more questions, trying to learn the language. The receiver room became, almost overnight, one of the most studious groups in the building. And Mahomes noticed, and he pushed further. The late-night sessions expanded. Sometimes there were 3 receivers in the room. Sometimes there were discussions that went on until midnight, covering not just route running, but defensive tendencies, down and distance situations, specific opposing corners and safeties, and what they like to do in certain coverages. Mahomes was essentially running a master's-level class in NFL offense, and his students were absorbing it. There's a concept in elite sports performance called compression of experience. Basically, when you're young in a sport, you need years and years of reps and failures and corrections to develop the pattern recognition that elite players have. It's why rookie seasons are usually rough. It's why it takes most NFL receivers 3 or 4 years to really hit their stride. But compression of experience says that if you can accelerate the feedback loop, if you can show someone the patterns faster, help them recognize failure before it happens rather than after, you can shorten that development timeline dramatically. What Mahomes was doing in those film sessions was pure experience compression. He was giving these rookies access to 10 years of his own pattern recognition, showing them what he sees, what he reads, what he reacts to. Instead of taking 3 years to develop that understanding through painful trial and error, they were getting a shortcut. Not to the physical reps, you can't shortcut those, but to the mental model, the framework. And in football, the mental model is often what separates the guys who make the team from the guys who don't, the guys who become starters from the guys who become backups. August turned into September. The regular season arrived. Kansas City opened up against a tough opponent, and the national conversation was still, to some degree, about the questions surrounding the receiver group, about whether the rookies were ready, about whether losing the veteran presence had left a hole that couldn't be filled. The first series told you something. Mahomes dropped back on the second play of the game, clean pocket. His eyes went left, then right, then back left, a quick head fake that moved a linebacker half a step, and then he fired right into a spot that, from the broadcast angle, looked like it was going to land 5 yards behind the receiver. The receiver wasn't where his original route took him. He had adjusted, broken off his route, found the soft spot in the zone, settled into the window that Mahomes had seen before the ball left his hand. Complete, 14 yards, first down. And in a dark film room somewhere, the ghost of all those late-night sessions was visible on the field. The game went exactly the way you'd expect a game to go when one team has spent months developing invisible communication and the other team has no idea it's happening. Kansas City moved the ball efficiently. Third downs that looked difficult converted. The offense stayed ahead of the chains. Mahomes finished with a passer rating that most quarterbacks would kill for. The rookie receivers combined for a performance that had analysts immediately revising their projections. But here's what the numbers didn't capture. The number of times a play was designed to go one place and Mahomes and a receiver, without a single word, redirected it to another. The number of times a coverage adjustment that should have been a problem wasn't a problem because they were both reading it simultaneously. That's the invisible statistic, the one that doesn't show up in a box score, the one that only shows up in wins. Week 2, the Chiefs traveled to Denver. Mile High in September is one of the most hostile environments in football. Not just because of the altitude, though the altitude is real. Your lungs work differently up there. Your legs get heavier in the fourth quarter than anywhere else. But the crowd at Mile High has an edge that's primal. It's the kind of noise that makes your eardrums feel like they're being pressed from the inside. And as I mentioned earlier, noise is the enemy of communication. Noise kills the ability to make the pre-snap checks and calls and signals that most offenses depend on. Most offenses. But here's what Mahomes had built, an offense where the communication had already happened, in a quiet film room, in the dark, before any of this noise ever entered the picture. The Broncos came out in multiple disguised coverages, rotating safeties, showing blitz and dropping into coverage, showing coverage and actually blitzing, the kind of defensive chess that is specifically designed to confuse a quarterback and force him into bad decisions. And it worked on first downs. Kansas City punted on their first 2 possessions. The crowd got louder. But then something happened that you could see if you were watching closely. Mahomes called the team together between possessions, and what he said, we don't know exactly, but the body language was calm, almost.
Third possession. The Broncos came out in another disguised look. But this time, as Mahomes got to the line, you could see him glance at one of the rookie receivers. Just a glance, nothing more. And the receiver made a micro adjustment in his stance, almost invisible, a slight widening of his split. The ball was snapped, the play unfolded. The Broncos rotated their coverage exactly the way that receiver's stance adjustment had indicated they were going to. And Mahomes, who had already identified it and communicated it with that one glance, threw to the exact spot the coverage had vacated. 26 yards. Just like that. The crowd went quiet for a moment, and Kansas City didn't look back. They won that game, not in a blowout. It was contested, physical, everything you'd expect from a division road game, but they won it. And the reason they won it was that in the loudest environment in the conference, they had found a way to communicate in silence. Let's talk about the AFC West race in the context of what was happening. Because the Broncos weren't lying down, they were competing. Every week they were hanging around, staying in games, making it difficult. Their defense was causing real problems for offenses around the league. And the Raiders were doing exactly what good Raiders teams do, playing with physical aggression, winning some games they had no business winning, putting fear into whoever showed up in Las Vegas. The Chargers were the most consistent threat. They were winning games they were supposed to win. Their quarterback was playing efficiently. Their defense was getting stops. But every time you looked at the standings, the Chiefs were there, ahead of everybody. Not by the margins you might expect from a dynasty, but ahead, consistently, almost annoyingly ahead. And the consistency was coming from that receiver room. Because here's the thing about building communication through film study and chemistry. It compounds. Every game you play together, every rep, every connection made and broken and made again, it builds on the foundation. The understanding gets deeper. The language gets richer. By week 6, Mahomes and these rookie receivers had a chemistry that most quarterback-receiver duos spend 2 or 3 years trying to develop. By week 10, defensive coordinators around the league were pulling their hair out because they couldn't figure out how Kansas City was converting third downs at such a high rate with receivers who, on paper, were supposed to be inexperienced. The answer was in a film room that those defensive coordinators had never seen and would never fully understand. There's a game. I want to focus on this one specifically because it crystallizes everything. Kansas City versus the Chargers. Prime time. Division game with major playoff seeding implications. The kind of game that shows up on every highlight reel and every best of the season compilation. The Chargers' defensive coordinator had done his homework. He'd watched every Chiefs game from that season. He'd identified the tendencies. He knew which routes the rookie receivers ran most frequently in certain situations. He'd built a game plan designed to take away their favorite spots on the field and force Mahomes to operate in areas where he was less comfortable. It was a good game plan. On paper, it should have worked. First quarter, it did work, sort of. Kansas City was scratching for yards. Mahomes was working through his progressions and not finding easy answers. The Chargers' defense was flying around, confident, communicating well, playing with energy. 7-6 at the end of the first quarter. Game on. Second quarter. Something began to shift. The Chargers had been running a specific coverage rotation, a pattern that they thought was disguised, but that Mahomes, watching from the pocket with his encyclopedic understanding of defensive tendencies, had begun to decode. And in the second quarter, he began teaching his receivers the decode in real time. Between plays, in the huddle, on the sideline during the 1-2-minute warning. Short, direct communication. His receivers were tracking, understanding, adjusting. By the time the first half ended, the Chiefs were ahead. And more importantly, Mahomes and his receivers were now running the Chargers' own defensive scheme against them, exploiting the soft spots that the Chargers thought they'd hidden. Third quarter, Kansas City came out of the locker room and essentially dominated possession. The Chargers' defensive coordinator made adjustments. Kansas City adjusted right back. And the key to every adjustment was not the plays being drawn up. The key was the receiver room knowing instantly, within snaps, how to read and react to something they'd never seen in a game setting, because they'd seen it in a film room. One of the rookies, on a 2nd and 7 in the third quarter, ran a route that cut against the direction his split suggested he'd go. The corner bit on the initial movement. The safety was too wide. There was a window, a tiny window, for about 1.5 seconds. The ball was already in the air. Touchdown. Just like that. The crowd in SoFi Stadium went to a different level of quiet. And if you'd been inside that film room during those late-night sessions, watching Mahomes draw the exact defensive look on a whiteboard and say, "Here, when this corner's feet do this, you break inside, because I'm going to put it here," you would have felt a chill up your spine, because you would have recognized what you were seeing. There's a concept I want you to sit with for a moment, because it's one of the most important things about what Mahomes did. He treated rookies like veterans. That sounds simple, but think about what it actually means. In most NFL locker rooms, rookies are at the bottom. They carry the pads, they take the bad locker spots, they absorb the hierarchy. Veterans hold knowledge like currency. There's a rhythm to earning your place, earning access to the deeper understanding. Mahomes broke that rhythm. Not loudly, not dramatically, not in a way that created friction. Quietly, by simply opening the film room door and saying, "Come in, Let's figure this out together. And the effect went beyond football knowledge. Those rookies felt trusted. They felt like they belonged. They felt like they were already part of something important, not just waiting in the lobby hoping to eventually get invited to the party. That psychological shift, the difference between playing afraid and playing with confidence, shows up in performance in ways that are massive but almost never quantifiable. A receiver who believes his quarterback trusts him runs his routes differently, fights for the ball differently, competes for contested catches differently, takes risks at the right moments instead of playing it safe. A receiver who is still trying to earn trust plays small. He worries about making mistakes. He hesitates on adjustments because he doesn't want to be wrong. Mahomes eliminated the hesitation before the season even started. By the midpoint of the season, the AFC West race had essentially clarified. The Broncos were fighting, competitive, but not quite at the level they needed to be to overtake Kansas City. They were building something for the future, and there was genuine excitement in Denver about what that future might look like. But this year, the ceiling wasn't quite there. The Raiders went through some of the unpredictable peaks and valleys that Raiders teams tend to go through. Brilliant one week, confusing the next. Football is chaos, and they were riding the chaos. The Chargers stayed competitive the longest. They were genuinely challenging. Games between Kansas City and Los Angeles were tight, hard-fought, decided by small margins. But the Chiefs kept winning those margins. And people were starting to ask, what is it? What is the actual difference? Because the talent gap between these teams is not enormous. The coaching gap is not enormous. The scheme gap is not enormous. So why is Kansas City always there? Why are they always just a step ahead? The answer was connection, trust, shared language. The AFC West race isn't just decided in the weight room or the game plan meetings or the draft board. It's decided in the moments when pressure is highest and everything is falling apart, and a quarterback needs to know, without looking, without calling, without signaling, that his receiver is going to be exactly where he needs him to be. Those moments come down to chemistry, and chemistry was built in the dark, on late nights, in a film room that the rest of the AFC West didn't know existed. Let me take you to the back half of the season, because this is where the story gets truly interesting. The Chiefs were playing well. The rookies were playing well above their expected level for first-year players. But around week 12, something happened that nobody anticipated. A veteran receiver went down with an injury, not a season ender, but significant enough to sideline him for multiple weeks. In most teams, that kind of absence creates a ripple, maybe a wave. You lose a known quantity, a reliable option that defenses have built their schemes around, and suddenly the offense has to restructure in ways that take weeks to become comfortable. Kansas City barely flinched, and the reason they barely flinched was because the rookies who stepped into expanded roles were not unprepared. They were overprepared. They had already seen this, already studied what the veteran did in 2 tight end sets, in 3rd and long, in red zone, in 2-minute drill. They had sat in that film room and watched how those roles function in the offense. They stepped in and played like they had been starters all along. The rest of the league noticed. Analysts started writing about the depth of the receiver room, about how surprisingly polished the young players were, about the system Andy Reid had built. Nobody wrote about the film sessions. Nobody knew. Week 15. The division was Kansas City's to lose, but there was still a game, the last meeting of the Chargers in the regular season, that could tighten the standings if things went the wrong way. The Chiefs came into that game with something to prove, not to the outside world. They'd been proving things to the outside world for years, and they were somewhat past caring about that. They wanted to prove something internally. They wanted to validate what they had built. The Chargers came in playing their best football of the season. Hot streak, momentum, all the things that make a team believe they can pull an upset. The game was physical from the start. The Chargers took an early lead. The crowd at Arrowhead, where Kansas City plays their home games in one of the loudest stadiums in football, was tense, not panicked. Chiefs fans have seen enough to know not to panic, but tense. And Mahomes was quiet, focused. The kind of focus that people who have been around him describe as almost unsettling, like watching someone slip into a different gear that most people don't even have. He took the offense down the field on the next possession, and the drive featured 3 plays that, if you freeze-framed them and watched them in slow motion, told the whole story of everything I've been describing. First play, Mahomes came to the line, made eye contact with a rookie receiver, and did something with his eyes, a look, just a look, that caused the receiver to widen his alignment by about half a step. The defense didn't notice. The play resulted in a 5-yard completion that also drew a pass interference call for an additional 15 yards. First down. Second play. On the snap, the Chargers brought a safety down into the box. This was not in the game plan. This was a disguise they hadn't shown on film all year. And yet, a different rookie, one who had spent hours in those late-night sessions studying safety rotations and triggers, read it immediately. He ran a different route than his assignment. Mahomes found him. 12 yards. Third play. The red zone. 4th and goal. The kind of moment that defines seasons. The Chargers brought pressure. 6 rushers. Mahomes had maybe 2 seconds, probably less. And his third option, the last receiver in his progression if the first 2 were covered, was a rookie. A kid who had been in the league for a few months. In the biggest moment of the game, the ball was potentially going to that kid if things broke a certain way. The pocket collapsed. First read, covered. Second read, bracket coverage, not happening. Third read. The rookie had beaten his man by about 1.5 yards, fought to the front pylon, got his hands ready. Mahomes threw it with the defender draped on him, put the ball in the only place it could be caught, low, outside, away from the safety rotation they had discussed 100 times in that film room. Touchdown. Arrowhead exploded, and Mahomes ran toward that rookie, and whatever he said to him, whatever exchange happened in that moment of celebration, it was built on something that started months earlier, in the dark, in a film room with a remote control and a giant screen, and the quiet, obsessive commitment to building something that nobody else could see coming. The AFC West race ended the way it had to end. The Chiefs won the division, again, with a receiver room that most people had counted as a question mark, with rookies who performed like veterans, with a connection between quarterback and wide receivers that defensive coordinators spent the entire season trying to crack and never fully figured out.